all doing good, had a nice new year, nice Christmas. This isn't my usual YouTube video. I'm, as you can see, in my kitchen with my bike. So I plan on doing a series of how-to videos, and it's going to be a how-to of servicing your bike and how-to do tricks. Today I'm going to start with the BSD Westcoaster Freecoaster hub because mine needs servicing. It's grotty, it's got drag, and it's thick black grease inside. And I've only done it 3 weeks ago. Reason being, the weather here has been absolutely awful. The critters have been out, and I think I've just picked up a load of muck off the paths that I've been riding on, and it's ended up in my free coaster. So servicing it twice in 4 weeks. The way I'm going to show you isn't the most conventional way, so please don't show it to your mechanics because they'll probably die inside. This is going to be a little bit of a ghetto how-to because we don't always have the parts we need, and you have to adapt to these things. If you do have the parts, make sure you use them because it'll feel way nicer in the long end. But I'm just going to show you how to do it with tools that you probably do have in your toolbox. For example, I don't have a punch, so I'm going to be using a 10mm hex Allen key. Yeah. So the bike's here, it's set up, it's ready. The first thing you're going to need is a socket set or a ratchet, which I have here, an extension with presumably a 17mm socket, long socket on the end for your male axle. Most aftermarket hubs come with a 17mm nut on them, but if you've had to swap that out for any reason, you may well have something slightly bigger like a 19mm, which is fine to do. Just note that your 17mm will fit the 19 and vice versa. So now I'm going to take off the wheel. So I've taken off my back wheel. As you can see, there are no stump pegs. Reason being, if you have stump pegs, take them off because we need to get to these cones. This one here and this one here, because we're going to take off both sides of the cone. And to do that, you're going to need either a 6mm Allen key or an 8mm Allen key, depending on which cut has been put into your axle. So you're going to need one of these. However, you can use one of these, which is a 6mm bit or an 8mm bit attachment to go onto your ratchet set. Both are perfectly fine, and if I'm honest, the ratchet is going to give you more leverage and it's going to feel a lot easier and nicer to take apart your cones. So I'm going to get underway with that. Okay, so I've taken off the drive side cone. You might want to check your specs with which Freecoaster you have because some of them prefer you take the non-drive side off before the drive side. This one I'm taking the drive side off first. Ultimately, doesn't matter too much because you're taking them both off anyway. But sometimes it works easier if you take the other one off before the other one because then you're not fighting against yourself or the driver or anything. But I've taken my first cone off and I'm going to put it down here. You might notice that there is a towel on the floor. That's so that I don't get any grease on my floor because my landlord would kill me, and obviously I don't have a workshop to work in. And I would do this at work, but they won't let me. I put some gloves on, because at this point it's going to get really, really mucky. You're probably going to need some kitchen towel and degreaser as well. I don't have any specialist degreaser. Again, we go and get it. Got trusty WD-40. I don't recommend it, but I'm using it anyway. I've also got some specialist grease, which you're also going to need. You don't want anything too thin because the idea is that you want it to bite the outer surface, which I'll show you shortly. If you have really thin grease, it's just going to repeatedly slip. You also don't want it too thick because it will then become really gungy and sloshy. It's going to become even thicker when the dirt gets compacted into it, and it's not going to feel nice at all. You want a nice balance in between, which is why I use Castrol. It's a nice medium weight grease and it runs really nicely. Again, if it's too thick, what will happen is your driver will go in and out of the clutch, but what it'll do because it's so thick, I'm sorry, what it will do is, because it's so thick, it will become stodgy and it will struggle to go into the clutch, and it will start slipping because of that as well. Which is why A, we don't put too much in, and B, we don't use too thick. So here I've got my driver. I've only undone one side because I want to do it step by step in order to give you the best view of how this works. But I've undone the drive side, and there is my driver. It is minging with black grease. So I'm going to clean that off now with some tissue and WD-40. Reason being, if you clean it off with degreaser, you know therefore it's then back down to the bare metal, and when you put on fresh grease, nothing's going to contaminate the grease and make it dirty again. I'm going to put some tissue on the floor to put these greasy parts on because I don't want to ruin my towel. I also don't want to ruin my floor. The first thing I've done the other day when I took apart my Freecoaster, I was actually out on a ride, and my Freecoaster started to slip, so I took the driver out, and the first thing I checked was the driver bearings. They're pretty easy to navigate. It's this one here, which, although it's I mean, it's spinning freely, it's a little bit rough, but it is like a year old. So, but as you can see, it is also, not that my camera is going to focus, it's pretty grungy in there too, so that could do with a good clean. But it's not worn down, so there's that. It's nice. Something you'll notice in drivers when you start to use them for say a year or more is they begin to, when you have teeth on the Freecoaster, they sort of look like this, and after a while of repeatedly being pulled by a chain, they start to bend like this and become shark toothed. You haven't really got long from there before the teeth start to snap off. So I recommend buying a new driver. Now I'm going to take off the opposing side, the non-drive side cone, and from there I'm able to get the axle out. Okay, that took a little bit longer than expected because I got my 6mm stuck in the end of my... Things like that are not going to help your driver. That is a ball of fluff, and I don't know how we got it. I got my 6mm stuck in the end of my axle. This is going to happen a lot to you. And something to note at this point is, as I've been advised by a number of my friends who have noticed, as well as myself, my axle is bent, which isn't going to help with my engagement. If you are having engagement issues, try your axle. Try your clutch to see how worn that is, and compression also helps in Freecoasters as well. If your cones are loose, then it means that there is extra room for the driver to go into the clutch and push the clutch back. If there is too much room, the clutch will then slip. So always make sure your cones are tight. I've taken off the non-drive side, so now the drive side is open, the non-drive side is open. Now from here, I'm able to, bear with me. From here, I'm now able to push the axle out from the non-drive side out the drive side. This is how the axle on the BSD Westcoaster looks, and as you can see, my camera is struggling to focus. Mine's pretty grimy, and that's because the grease is minging. It's not particularly warm, but it has got a slight bend in it. This happens. It's only got a small bend though, so I don't think it's going to be giving me too many troubles, but I think anything further than what mine is it's going to start causing you issues with engagement. Purely because what will happen is the clutch and the driver will start to sit on it just like a millimetre or two off, and it will start to burr in deeper on where that bend is, and then what you're going to have is, as your clutch goes round and the opposing side will then start to miss the engagement wall on the upper side of the inside of your hub shell, and every time it does that, whilst you're pedaling, it's going to go whoop, whoop, whoop. Hope you like my sound effects. But that's what will happen. So there's my axle, which I'm going to clean off as well. Starting to get dirty now. And here is the hub with no axle in. What we're going to need to do now is, I don't know if you can see, I'll get it closer, is there's a circlip there, this thing here. And for that, all it is a washer basically with a split in the middle, and because of this split, what the washer does is it can expand and contract. This isn't going to be on, in fact, to be honest, the only Freecoaster I've seen this on is the Westcoaster. So you're probably not going to need these unless you have a Westcoaster, but these are circlip pliers. And what they do is they go into the hole, you pinch it open and carefully remove the circlip because it will ping out, and good luck finding that. And yeah, there are ways to get it out without these, but they're not easy ways. So you are going to need a pair of these. So what you can see here and what I'm about to show you is the circlip pliers go into these two holes here. You then pinch it very carefully and slowly remove it. And as you can see, it's not a complete circle. And if I slowly, I'm hoping this really doesn't ping. If I slowly release the tension on these circlip pliers, you can see that it opens up. And what happens is there's a groove. There is a groove that is going to be very difficult to show you up on the inside of this hole that basically the circlip will expand into, and it holds your bearing in there. And now that that circlip is out, I can now remove the bearing and get the clutch out so I can service the clutch as well. For that, you're going to need a punch, or in my case a 10mm hex key, which we're going to stick down this hole here, and you're going to gently make sure it's not in your clutch and it is actually against the back wall of the bearing, because what you're going to do is now gently hammer that bearing out so that we can get the clutch out. And if you start hammering at the thread that's inside your clutch, you're going to ruin the clutch. So you want to make sure it is on the back wall of that bearing. And I'm going to punch that out now. I punched out the bearing, it's now not in there, and I'm hoping what you can see is those lines along the top side of the hub wall, that is grease. So we are going to need to remove this bearing as well so that we can get some degreaser down there and get that grease out, because that's going to cause you some engagement issues as well. Yes, the clutch is supposed to grip that wall, and you only need the smallest bit of grease on that wall, just so that it stops your clutch from wearing down too quickly from engaging and not engaging from it. But you need minimal grease on there, like you really shouldn't put grease on there. And again with that, I'll show you in a second, that contact facing part of the clutch as well, again minimal grease. It's supposed to grip. The only reason the grease is there is A, so it doesn't seize if you leave your bike sat for a while, and B, just to stop it from wearing down too much. The best way to get this bearing out is you want to hit it here, 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 and here. Just small taps. You don't want to really smash at it because you're just going to ruin the bearings. Hit it on the 4 points and it will slowly come out. Okay, so you don't want to be too rough with this because you're going to need to replace the bearing. If you do, you're going to batter it. So that's the bearing. The bearing it's a little bit dirty, but the bearing runs free, as you can see, or can't see, I don't really know. It's running smoothly. There's nothing wrong with this. So the first thing I've noticed taking the clutch out is that my clutch is not being focused on by the camera, is particularly greasy, and it's also getting to a point where it's pretty. Will you please focus? What is wrong with you? You see these silver lines? That's wear, and it's getting to the point where my clutch is actually going to need to be replaced, but I'm not going to do that today because I don't have a spare one. Behind my clutch, which I'll show you the assembly as I'm putting it back together, is these little spacers, and they sit behind the clutch wall, basically like that. and where the driver will push it backwards and forwards, these act as a buffer basically behind the bearing, and these are engagement washers. So they close your engagement from, say, most of them come with 90-degree engagement. You put a couple of these in and it will slowly bring the engagement down to, say, 45 degrees on your pedals. That's what they are. So on to taking out the drive side bearing. Like I said, we need to get inside here and clean here, which again we're going to use WD-40, or if you have a degreaser at home, I recommend using degreaser. Again, I'm going to use a punch. There's not much contact room, contact area for us to use a punch, but I don't see as I have a choice because I need to get in here and clean it. So yeah, I'm going to get down there with a punch and I'm going to pop that out. That came out really easily, and as you can see, there's a nice piece of metal from where something is married into it. I think that's off the shim that you'll find. The, again, is running very smoothly. There's no issues with that bearing. And I should hope not, because it's only about 3 months old as well. What you can see in here though is a lot of grease. That shouldn't really be there. This is a wall that gets screwed into the inside of the hub shell, and this is your contact surface area for the clutch. Shouldn't have a lot of grease on it at all. There should be minimal grease, like virtually dry, basically. Should you ever need to replace that inner wall of the hub shell, just bear in mind that although a right hand drive one would fit inside of a left hand drive and vice versa, they're not compatible, and the reason being because this is a turning surface where the clutch engages into it. If you have a right hand clutch engaging into a left hand internal, it will slowly undo it and it will burr itself into the bearing. And I know this because we did it, and it fucked the Freecoaster. So just bear that in mind, that the right hand internals do not fit the left hand internals. We thought it would work, it did not. So we don't actually need to take this out today unless you really want to, because I'm only going to degrease it and clean it out at this point. As it's the first point of call for putting the hub back together. I mean, you can start with whichever point you want, but as this is the muckiest, I'm going to get it out of the way. So I'm going to change my gloves because they're minging. So some fresh gloves, put some degreaser in there. Again, I recommend using like a legitimate degreaser and not WD-40 because WD-40 sucks. And I'm going to get on with that now. So I've got fresh gloves on. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my Audi's kitchen towel, and I'm going to stuff it down the inside of the Freecoaster, and I'm going to get out all the mass residue that's in there. If I start blasting degreaser in there now, it's going to take way too long. So you get the bulk of it out first, try and clean it up a bit, then use degreaser to get the last bits off, which I'm going to do now. So I haven't sprayed the degreaser in there yet. That's the first thing I've noticed once I've got the most of the residue out, is I can try and show you. I'm not sure if it'll work. Yeah, maybe. You can see a thin score up the front side of this hub. And what that is where I said that after long use you might need to replace that, and basically what's happening is the clutch is now burrowing up into the inside of this hub shell, and I suspect shortly I'm going to need to replace that too. If I'm quite honest with you, it's beginning to look like I'm going to need a new Freecoaster. Not yet, obviously, otherwise I won't be servicing it, but soon. So now I'm going to blast it with degreaser and get the rest of this grease out. I'm going to let that sit for a second. Something to note is when using degreaser, keep it away from all of your bearings and make sure you dry up all of it. Otherwise it's only going to ruin your bearings and give you issues down the line. Whilst that's sitting for a second, I'm going to clean down my clutch and show you that as well. Something I've just noticed inside the clutch of the BSD Westcoaster is there is a spring up the inside of this bit. Do I know what it's for? No. Did I know it was there? No. Probably might be something to do with the drag that I'm experiencing, as it looks a little bit out of place, but I'm not too worried about that. As I say, I'm going to be ordering a new clutch as this one seems pretty worn down. I do a lot of mileage on this bike. Freecoasters aren't built for mileage, so if you don't drive yet, like myself, and rely on your bike to get you absolutely everywhere, I use mine daily to get to and from work. They're not built for that, so you're going to notice that your Freecoaster is going to need more maintenance than usual. If you keep on top of it, your Freecoaster will last you a longer time, for obvious reasons. I can try and focus on this, but you can see that there are some scores on the inside of the thread as well, caused by the driver, which I suspect is probably worn in a bit as well, and now it's just wearing on new surfaces. As you can see on the outside of my clutch, now that I've taken more residue off, is the amount of wear that is on this clutch, and that is why am I looking at the wrong side of the screen? That is why I'm replacing the clutch soon. It's going to get to a point where I'm getting sort of like 180 degrees engagement, so I'll be going to engage, and I'm going to go from top straight down to bottom before it engages. And if you do that mid-ride, likelihood is you're probably going over the bars. It's pretty grey and it's hard to get into these grooves, so again I'm going to hit that with some degreaser. Now it's time to clean my driver off. It's pretty minging. Again, hard to get into the grooves. Something I can suggest to you would be, if you have an old toothbrush or have one that you don't mind going to waste if you're replacing one, is use a toothbrush to get into these grooves. Because of the small bristles, they work really well at scrubbing out dirt and getting into these hard to fit in places. I'm trying here to get up the grooves on the inside of this driver face because it's very dirty. I am going to use my circuit pliers on there is a circuit in there holding the bearing in. I'm going to use my circuit pliers to pop the bearing out and see if I can just give it a better clean. If you are going to use circuit pliers to get the circlip out of the driver, just bear in mind it's a way smaller circlip and there's way more tension on it. It's gonna go ping, and just watch your eyes and stuff. If you're going to use degreaser on your driver as well, just bear in mind that it's a good idea to take the circlip and the bearing out of the driver. Be very careful because these bearings are really delicate, and if you crush this bearing, you're really going to feel it while you're pedaling. If you don't have circlip pliers and you can't get this bearing out, just be super careful with the degreaser because you will trash this bearing. But I'm going to punch mine out and give it a good clean. Interestingly, I've just taken the bearings out of the driver. Something I've just found out is there's two bearings inside the driver. They sit side by side like that. Why there's two bearings? I don't know. But they are minging. This now gives me the option to use the degreaser on the driver without, ruining the bearings. So I'm going to degrease this driver and let that sit for a second as well. Okay, so now that I've let everything sit for a while, I'm now going to clean all of the grease off of my internals you know, for the final piece. And then what I'll do is grease it all up with you guys on the camera, and then start to put it all back together. But first I'm going to change my gloves so that the dirty oil and residue on them doesn't contaminate the fresh that I'm going to put on. So probably a good time to start re-greasing my internals. I've just ran out of degreaser, so probably wasn't a bad time to do this video as well. So I think the first port of call would be to put the driver back together, because it's the only thing that's like internally apart that needs to go back onto the axle. So once we got that back on, then everything else is straightforward. Got the driver. We got 2 bearings for the driver. On this one we've got a red side and a black side, and the way you're going to put these in is both of the red sides are going to face the outer side of the driver. And to put these in, I recommend using a bearing press. Again, not everyone has a bearing press, but all you're going to do is put a little bit of grease up on the inside, using your finger, on the inside of this driver, and then on this outer wall here, you're going to put just a little dab of grease, just so that it slides it inside easier. As we're not using a bearing press, you should be able to get them in with your hand, like just pressing with your thumbs. But if you can't, then you're going to need to use the punch and be very careful. I'm going to have to use the punch because we're going to be gathering. You're going to need to use a punch, and because I don't have one, I'm going to use the end of my socket, but the flat end. So the flat end against here. Like I said, I don't recommend this at all, because it's not the way to do it. Use a bearing punch if you have one. If you have access to a shop or a workshop, that's the way forward. I'm going to use a hammer and this. So the bearings are now back into my driver, as you can see. The next thing to do is put the circlip back in. You're going to have to be super careful with this because it is really fidgety and it will ping out. So the circlips, not that you can see them from here, but there is 2 holes here. The circlips go into those holes, and you're going to need to close the circlip and slide it into the groove that is in your driver. Once you release the pressure, it might ping out, and you have to do it twice. That is now running really nicely, but what I'm going to do, so that it's not, best way to show you is, it will go down on here, the bearings, that's where they sit. They sit on that race, like that, down there. To stop so much wear and stop it from dragging or maybe creating too much friction, I'm just going to put a sliver of grease on the inside of these bearings. But a little bit. Like that. That's all I'm using. And that will probably wipe off most anyway. The reason I'm saying a little bit is you don't want a lot of grease inside Freecoasters. They wear down quicker, but too much grease makes the Freecoaster not work as it should. But that's the driver done. Which I'm not going to stick down anywhere at the moment, but I'm going to stick it on the end of this axle, because what I want to do is show you how the axle is lined up. And if you have the axle like this, the driver, it goes down this short end and slots on there. The clutch will come down this end. The next thing to do would be to grease this up. Again, I'm going to use the bare minimum amount. That's probably too much if I'm being realistically honest. But it's going to go on this surface. Literally just the grooves, that's it. You don't want it anywhere else. And in hindsight, actually, that's probably the perfect amount to go on the sides of those grooves. Once you have greased the outside of your grooves, you're going to want to put a sliver, just a little bit, on the inside of the thread. And this will stop your driver from ruining the thread. Again, I'm going to use just a little dab, because the most of what's going to go in here, I'm actually going to stick on the driver to help it engage. So now my driver's on. Again, not too much. That doesn't look like an awful lot actually in hindsight on the video. It doesn't need to be an awful lot. As you can see, there is not an awful lot on that driver. It doesn't seem like a lot that's on your driver, but realistically, you know, if you're using it a lot, you should be maintaining your driver, your Freecoaster, like every 8 to 12 weeks at least. So you don't want to use an awful lot because you're going to be cleaning it back off anyway. Once you're done finished greasing your clutch, just a little dab on the inside, tiniest little bit on the outside. You can now feed it down your axle, and because my spring is a little bit out of line, it doesn't really want to go over the smooth edge. It's on. It'll go down that side, and you can now wind your driver into the clutch. As you can see, I have put too much grease on. Wipe that off. The reason we wipe that off is because as you threaded the driver into the clutch, it's pushed out any excess grease. That excess grease is only going to become dirty, and it's going to go on the inside of your hub shell, and it's going to create too much dirty, sloppy grease between the clutch and the hub shell, which is going to create it to slip, and it's also going to give you extra engagement before it actually engages. Behind the clutch will go your engagement spaces. 1, 2, and 3. And then from there, your bearings will now go on here once you've stuck it inside the hub. So now that those components are ready, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grease this inside facing wall and this inside facing wall, and we're going to put the bearings back where they should be as well. Once we've got the bearings back into where they should be, again, you only need a little bit of grease because you're only putting the bearing in. You just want it to be easier to put the bearing in so that you're not breaking the bearing by pressing into it too hard. With the drive side bearing, I had a shim. This is a tiny little piece of metal that sits behind the drive side bearing, and it basically sits on this groove here, and it's to stop the bearing rubbing onto the screw face of the inner side of the hub. So don't forget to do that. Again, I recommend using a bearing press. If you don't have one, feel free to use a hammer really lightly. Either a wooden mallet or a rubber mallet would be your best option. Just be super light with it. Really, realistically, don't use a metal hammer. You don't want to have the metal hammer smashing in the side of this bearing, because then you're going to render it useless. Once you've put in the drive side bearing, it's now time to put the clutch down into the hub, because if you put this bearing on now, you're not going to get the clutch in. So here is our clutch, and the way to do this is your driver goes down into here and it will start to screw into this clutch. So when you put it down in this side, you need to have the threaded part facing towards where the driver would go down into the hub, like so. So then what you'll have is the back side of the clutch here, and then you want to put in the engagement washers behind the clutch. Again, once you put the bearing on, you're not going to be able to get them down. Now that we've done that, we can now put the bearing in and put the circlip on to keep the bearing in place. So I'm now going to press the bearing in. Now that we've put in the non-drive side bearing, it's time to put the circlip in. You don't want to forget that, but before you do that, you want to make sure that your bearing is symmetrically in right the way around, otherwise your circlip isn't going to go in. I'm sure you all know how to work one of these, but for those who are probably not so confident, like myself, because I'm really struggling with this, you put the circlip in the pliers and you pinch it shut. And this probably isn't going to go in as easy as the one from the, although it just did, as the one from the driver, but it's in. You just make sure you hit it down and it's clicked in all the way around. Better check because it just clicked. Once you've got the circlip in, it's now time to put the axle back in. This is the drive side where the driver will go down, and when you're putting the axle back in, you want the large section of the contact surface area to go down first, because that's going to go up inside the clutch, and this smaller part of the surface area is going to is where the driver slots onto. So we're going to feed that down here like this. You should feel it. It will resist a little bit and then pop like that. It's a perfect example, and that is because of the spring up on the inside of the clutch. So what we'll do now, now that the axle is in, is we're going to tighten up the non-drive side bearings with the cones, which is this flat plate washer, and that grooved bit, that's going to go in against the hub, and that will sit against the race of the bearing, so it'll run nicely. If you put it the other way around, what it'll do is it'll squash the bearing and basically make sure that it doesn't run. And then this little grooved oblong nut is then going to wind down against it, and the reason we do this is so that when we feed the driver down into the hub against the clutch, it's not going to pull the axle out the wrong way. But alternatively, what it'll do as well is when we wrench up this nut, it's going to pull the axle the correct way and just make sure that it's seated nicely against the bearing race where it should be. Otherwise, what will happen is when you put the driver down and it's not all the way in, is there's going to be like a mil or two gap, and that'll create you more engagement issues. Now that we have put the non-drive side bearings on and the axle is seated nicely, we can now feed the driver down, which should just click into place. And then if you hold with your non-dominant hand, hold the axle, it'll stop it from spinning. You can now twist the driver down into the clutch until it engages. Now the wheel will spin as it should when it's connected to your bike, because it's engaged. The last piece of the puzzle is to fit the nut down, the locking nut down against the driver. You'll see here that you've got two grooves. One is tapered, this side, and one is flat, which is this side. The tapered side is going to go down into the driver, which will lock it into place. Again, if you put the wrong side down, what you'll get is it resisting against the component, so the driver won't spin basically. What the taper does is it goes down enough to keep the driver into place, but not quite enough so that the driver can freely move forwards and backwards when it engages and disengages. So now that we've done that, that's the last piece of the puzzle, and you can now put your wheel back on, stump pegs, etc., the hub guards. If you're having trouble putting the locking nuts down onto the axle, I suggest the same way that you took them off is to put the 6 or the 8mm down one end of the axle and the adjustable and work them against each other. You want a nice, snug, tight lock on that. It's possible that because of the engagement and disengagement, the continuous motion, what will happen is it will try to undo itself, which happens a lot. So make sure it is nice and snug up there. What you'll get, much like myself, probably not with the 8mm so much, but the 6mm, your ratchet gets stuck and it doesn't want to come out. The best resolution for this is stick another 6mm on the other side, and you want to work them against each other, because what's happened is your 6mm has basically slipped into the slot it shouldn't be in, and it will click back out of place. Should click back there. And now it's free to go back on the wheel just as long as it's running as it should be. Thank you for watching the least professional, mechanical, helpful DIY how to repair your Freecoaster hub that you've ever seen in your life. I really hope you've come and gotten what you needed. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, and make sure you like, subscribe and share it with your friends. I'm sure they can have a giggle at this when they realise I have no idea what I'm doing. Thank you for watching. Follow the link.